Okay, well, assalamualaikum everyone. Sorry we are facing a little bit of difficulty, but we're going to continue with the presentation. My name is Sana. I am their CAIR social media coordinator, and we are joined by Huma, who is a board member, along with Nancy Price, who is a member of the League of, Women
Voters of St. Louis.
Of St. Louis, yes. Okay, the floor is yours.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I was asked to come and talk to you tonight, and it's kind of different because I'm used to presenting to faces and people, but to try and help motivate people to go and vote. And if there are things I can do to dispel myths or to motivate you, because I'm thinking you are probably registered. If you're not, call the County Board of Elections. If you live in the city, you have to call the City Board of Elections or look them up online. It's by what county you live in. And of course, the city of St. Louis has its own as well. So just a little bit about the League, really short. We are nonpartisan. We do not do red, blue, green, any other colors. What we do is we do issues. We have lots of issues that we work on. We're doing a lot of work with redistricting and some of the other issues that are going on right now, but we are nonpartisan. So I'm not going to be speaking anything about politics. And since we're recording this, let's all try to do that, because that's just a good way to have this go. So tonight I am going to, let me share my screen. Let's see. I want to go, hopefully, yes, that's where I want to be. Okay, so my feeling about voting is that there are three parts. One is you need to be registered and do all that, so that's registration. Then you need to get some education about what it is that you're going to be voting on. And the third thing is participation, which is actually taking your body to go vote. So here's a lot of information about the League. We are there. We're there 9:30 to 3:30 Monday through Friday. We answer the phones. A lot of times the County Board of Elections refers people to us, which we think is just hysterical. And so anything you want to know, if we can help you, we will. If we can't, we'll find somebody that can. First thing to know is that your vote does matter. People think, oh, one vote, it's not a big deal, whatever. Well, actually it is, because not a lot, but there are plenty of races that are decided on a razor's edge. And when we get to it, we'll be talking about the local elections, which will be happening in April. And lots of times turnout is under 20%. So your vote really goes far. And then the other thing is, some people say, well, with the Electoral College, my vote doesn't really count. Well, the Electoral College only applies to the presidency, and we're not electing one this year. So this is your year to vote. Voting is your chance to show that you care about your community, state, and country. It's also a way for you to have some control over the governmental decisions that affect your family, friends, and community. Your vote can influence things like taxes, the air you breathe, the education you receive, healthcare, many transportation, which are all big issues here in, I'm in St. Louis County. I assume most of you are either in the county or adjacent. Many elections, especially local ones, are decided by a very small number of votes. That's what happens when you have like 15% turnout. This is a little bit old, it's from the Clinton-Trump campaign. But what I want you to see is that the percentage that voted for Clinton is less than 20. The percentage that voted for Trump is less than 20. They are extremely close, 0.3%. Now that's 0.3% of a very big number, but still. And then there's this almost 30% who didn't even vote. So non-voters really can make a lot of difference if they vote. Ineligible to vote could include, I don't really know what's in there, but it could be non-citizens, it could be people that are somehow connected with a felony or something where they have lost their right to vote until it's restored. But I think it's amazing that we've got 30% didn't vote. And that was, you know, a pretty talked about election. So for anybody that might be a little unsure, the presidential election is the one we elect the president every 4 years. The midterm is the middle of the presidential term. So they're both happen on even numbered years, but this year will be the midterm for Biden, and we will be elected a lot of other things, but a lot of people don't think that it's important because there's not a president. And so what I wanted you to see is that midterm elections are generally a much lower turnout. And every time I tell you something is a low turnout, you should think my vote's going to count for more. So here's how historically the national voter turnout has been trending over since 1978. And what you can see is it's not really gone a whole lot. It's, you know, give or take 50%. And it did go up in 2018. But, you know, we're talking like half the people vote. And these are all based on voting age population, citizen voting age population. They may not be all registered to vote, but they could be. So this is the pool of people who could be voting. They're old enough and they're citizens. So here's some turnouts by race. I wish it was more, had more categories, but this is what there was. Non-Hispanic white, about 73% turnout, not 73% of the votes, but of the voting age population, 73% of the non-Hispanic whites voted. The non-Hispanic blacks were 66%, which is 2/3, and Hispanics were around half, and other is actually a little bit higher. So one of the reasons that if you want to think that maybe whites get more of the attention or resources is because they have a higher voter turnout. So that's something to think about. So the non-Hispanic white share of the electorate, people that could vote, has been going down. It's still over 70%, but it has gone down. 1984, it looks like it's about 85%. And that's something we hear about in the news, so that's not too surprising. This is turnout by age. And again, what we see is that there are different percentage turnouts by how old people are. So 60 plus years, 78% of them show up. That's really good. 45 to 59, that's pretty good too. I mean, I wish they were all closer to 100. That's 72%. And the 30 to 44 is 65. What I want you to look at though is the 52% of 18 to 29. That is the group that, as you can see from the chart, it's the bottom blue line or whatever it is. That's always been the lowest percentage of that age group actually turn out and vote. But it did really spike up some in 2020. So I know there's a lot of efforts into getting the youth vote out, and at least for that data point, it worked. So youth numbers increased in 2018. Voter turnout went from 20% in 2014. 4 years later, it was 36%. And that's a very large 79% jump. And I know I am a baby boomer, and we were always kind of told that we were like spoiled because we were such a big demographic group and the world rotated around us. But I can tell you that the younger ones are a bigger demographic group in terms of numbers. And I don't think they've realized their power yet. So a little bit about why youth voices are important. And I don't know how many of you are youth, but I know that when I do talk about voting, I get grandparents and parents, because by the time someone's like 18, they're not so interested in what their adults have to say in their life. And people are always asking me, how can I get them to vote? So I'll give you some ammo if that's your situation. Young voters are half of the voting population, but older Americans are more likely to vote. So that gives older Americans more power. Not saying people like me are bad voters, but young voters have something that they're not using. Every vote counts. Young voters are incredibly diverse. It's the most diverse demographic group that we have in many ways. A higher percent of young voters have independent views. They were not as likely to have grown up in like a Republican household or a Democrat household. Young people need to participate in voting at an earlier age, because what we know is that if people start voting in the beginning, it's a habit. So that's really an important thing if you're trying to train yourself or train a youth. It's easier than ever to be an educated voter. There are a lot more resources. I will say, on the other hand, you have to really be a better consumer because there's a lot of misinformation out. And the youth vote really can sway the election. So let me see if I can make this thing go away up here. I don't know how to do that. Oh, well. So the younger generation, as you can see, has been casting more votes. And the boomers, which, as I said, we were always the supposed to be the big bulge in the snake. We're kind of getting neck and neck with the Gen Z, the millennials, and the Gen Xers. So I should not be advertising how you can make my vote less, but we're going to go with this anyway. So the largest generation, and can you hear us now? Well, if you vote, people will hear you. Another aspect about the voting age population that we can look at is the turnout rates by education. And as you can see, the more education, the higher the turnout. And there's no line crossing here. That's just very consistent. And here, this, unfortunately, it's from 2018, but we really don't have 2022 data yet. So as you can see, the turnout has been going up for pretty much every group. But if you look at the 18 to 29, that's almost double. So that's pretty impressive. I'll leave that for a second in case anybody wants to look for their group. All right, a lot of people will say, I only to bother to vote if it's a presidential election because, why bother with the rest? Well, I think you should bother with the rest because the rest actually affects your life a lot more. If you're having problems with your taxes or your education or transportation, whatever, very little of that is a presidential problem. I mean, sometimes there can be money for transportation, but it really is people a lot closer to you that determine so many of the aspects in your life. So why should you bother to vote in local elections? I made this myself, which means it's not quality. So I don't know why they're so narrow, but what these bars show you is that going back 10 years, we have had like 11, and then that 1 year that's really tall was the local election with Prop P, which was the policing money. And I don't know if that, usually if there's tax increase, people will come out and vote. But it's pretty much, somewhere around 15% is all that votes for the muni elections. They're usually in April, unless there's a presidential primary or something. So this year we will be having the general muni elections, and somewhere around 15% maybe are going to show up. So if you bring your vote, you have a much greater percentage of the total. So why voting matters in the local elections? Well, because the people get elected and then they go out and decide. And they decide a lot of things, as I said, that affect your life. Things from traffic, streets, types of stores. There's like, can you have a marijuana dispensary? Well, that's a local thing. Facilities to play sports and join teams. Do you have a neighborhood park with things going on? I wrote this for younger people originally, but you can congregate on the streets. I mean, there are curfews. There's no skateboarding. They also hire the police departments and the municipal court judges. And then the school board members are going to be on April election as well. The climate of your schools, discipline, what you're allowed to do, quality of your schools, the teachers that are hired, the material that's being provided. We're hearing a lot about, what books should or shouldn't be, or what should be taught in curriculum. And your school board can make a decision that, guess what? We can't afford to keep up the football field, so we're not going to have a football team anymore. So those are all things. And then there's the reputation. I mean, we live in St. Louis and people go, so where did you go to high school? People have a perception depending on what high school you actually say you went to. So that is maintained basically through the school boards and the culture and people that you've elected. Then there are the state legislators. Could be your House or your Senate in Missouri. These are very important things. They're voting on all kinds of things in Missouri, like gun laws, and we're just hearing a lot of controversy. Some of the things that affect you could be school funding, like your school district, licenses for different jobs, like if you want to be a hairdresser or, different, especially the technical jobs. They are in charge of licensing them, startup programs, internships, payday lending laws, Pell Grant funds, the A+ funding, which is money that high schoolers can compete to win, and it helps them go to college, and policies for banks and the stuff that you read about every day in the paper. This is where it's happening in local. So also non-presidential elections are also where how much a president or governor can do depends on whether his or her party controls the Senate and or the House. Look what we see going on in the federal government. Things get through the House, then they go to the Senate. Then there's like, should we get rid of the filibuster because we can't get a consensus? These are all things. So the president's job and how well he can do it depends on the House and the Senate. And in Missouri, the same thing where we have a state House and a Senate, and the governor can veto things, but you can have deadlock. We have a lot of other state and local office holders. I mean, your county council, which is, having so much difficulty right now, your mayor, all these things. And also a lot of times when there is not a president, it could be when there is a president, but a lot of the non-presidential election years have amendments and propositions, which have to do with some big things that make a difference in your life, like the marijuana dispensaries and things like that all came through on an election. Another reason is the higher turnout. If more people turn out and vote, it really makes our democracy more representative. You talk to people and everybody is against something, and then the opposite happens. Well, sometimes it's because who bothered to go and vote. There are other reasons that things can not go the way you would have expected, but that's one of them. If people all support something and they don't go out and vote, then probably not going to happen. So a lot of things that we work on in the legislature in Missouri disproportionately affect people of color, low-income people, young people, and income is also that more you make, the more likely it is for you to go and vote, and your turnout is higher. So that's another reason that lower income people, I mean, it's not the only reason, but lower income people might be less well represented because they don't vote at such a high rate. Could be for very legitimate reasons, but there's one of the causes that we are in control of. Another thing was that they had a very interesting study I read after some of the 1965 laws where it enabled more Black people to vote, especially in the South. When they were able to register and vote, they got more resources, like their schools got more money, their roads were in better shape. So there is a relationship between, if nobody shows up, then you're less likely to get that money. And we know that. So if you want more resources to come to things around you, go vote. It's not a guarantee, but it does help. The margin of victory can also be important. Even if you live in a state or district which is not competitive, like most people were fairly certain that Trump was going to take Missouri in the last election. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't vote, because the decisiveness of the win is important too. When a candidate wins in a landslide, they go, oh, I got this big mandate, and they feel emboldened to act more forcefully on their campaign promises. A candidate who wins with a narrow margin, they cannot be as liberal or conservative because they've got to be trying to draw in the other side. So it does matter, even if you kind of know your guy's not going to win, or woman, but you don't want the person that's going to win to think they got 100% of the vote. Also, even a vote for a third party can have impact. Sometimes a third party knows they're not going to win, or maybe they don't run the beginning, but it's pretty obvious fairly early on. But they have a particular issue that they want to keep talking about, keep in the limelight. And they say that Ross Perot, who ran against Bill Clinton, beat him. But Ross talked so much about needing to balance the budget that when Bill Clinton won by a landslide over Ross Perot, he still had to deal with the issue of what are we going to do about making the budget more the budget more balanced. So you might not win, a third party might not win, but they might have some good issues. Another thing was like the more recent one would be Bernie Sanders, where he talked about healthcare for all, healthcare for all, healthcare for all. Well, before he ran, that was not necessarily a hot topic the way it is now. And things are happening with that. Missouri just voted to expand Medicaid. So they haven't figured out how to fund it yet, but hopefully it's going to happen. And voting, I mean, not to guilt you, but truthfully, it's something that Americans have that a lot of people don't. And a lot of Americans have struggled, gone overseas, died, come back, whatever kind of shape, so that we can do that. A lot of countries don't get to vote. And a lot of the ones that don't get to vote are the ones that have refugees. I mean, like fleeing refugees, not like I think I'll immigrate. So the reasons to vote in non-presidential elections, it really comes down to voting is your voice. And I'm a child of the 60s. We did all this, you know, started running around doing all the demonstrations. But even when you do that, you can shine a light on the issue. But until you get laws in place and practices and policies, things don't change. You know, and there's a place for, my personal feeling is peaceful demonstrations, because if you can get publicity, then you can get people on your side of the issue, but you still have to get like the Voting Rights Act passed, or you're not going to have the benefit. So I think you have to vote even if you protest. We were protesting and we couldn't vote. You couldn't vote till you were 21. I couldn't vote at 18. So as I said, there are a lot of these things that local governments determine. And you want to have a parade, you want to do, you want tennis courts, or you want a swimming pool. This is where those decisions happen. And as I said, the school boards decide a lot of things. We're hearing so many controversial, I mean, masks. I mean, the whole, every topic that you just hear a lot about. Some of the things that the state legislators decide are voting requirements, like if you need a photo ID or felon voting. I don't know if everybody knows this, but felon voting in Missouri, if you get convicted of a felony, you lose your right to vote until you go through whatever sentence. Like a felony means it's supposed to have a minimum 1-year sentence. So there's usually a prison term, and then there is some kind of probation or parole or whatever on the other end. Depends on, you know, what society's view of your transgression is. Now, in Missouri, until you finish all your probation, all your parole, a lot of people call it off papers, you cannot vote. Now, I come from part of the country where either most of the time you can just walk out the door and your voting right is restored. And there are a couple of states, New England, where even when you could be sitting on death row and voting because you don't lose your right to vote. So that's a state controlled issue. And if you have opinions on that, this is where you would deal with it. There's state funding of the schools and the A+ program. That money A lot of it, the school funding is determined by the state. And when the COVID money came down, it went to the state. So how it gets allocated, that's all happening with the state legislators and the governor. So those are things that you really want to, I think you want to have an opinion. You probably do have an opinion on, and you need to share it. And the other thing people say is, where can I get reliable information? I mean, there's so much misinformation out there, and you know, we've lost what we used to have was more serious journalism, and you couldn't say something unless you had two sources. Now I can go and put anything I want on my Facebook page, unless it's really egregious. Facebook might get irritated at me. But so therefore, we have to be the judges of what's misinformation. So it's not fact checked anymore. So one place you can go is vote411.org. That's all you have to put in. You can go there, you put in your voting address, and it'll tell you everything that's going to be on your ballot. And sometimes that's really good because people go, well, I don't know if there are any issues. It's like the sewer company looking for money, or, you know, I heard there might be a tax increase. Well, that's where you can find out. And there are times when, you know, there's nothing on there because we're between elections. You can go to lwvstlouis.org, which is the St. Louis Metropolitan Area League. And we do St. Louis City, St. Louis County, Jefferson County, and St. Charles County, and one more. But, you know, further out there, we have less presence because, I don't know, if you live out there, come join us. And also there are things like donors. You can go to this MEC-Missouri.gov, and you will get information about money, who's funding these candidates, and what do you think? So, and then also FEC.gov is information on donors for federal elections. And there's another site that I'm sorry I didn't put on here that helps you figure out with the judges, because we have votes on retention of judges. And everybody goes, I don't know anything about them. Well, judges are not allowed to campaign. So you won't. What they do is their peers put them on the bench, essentially, or well, they get put on the bench, and then their peers review them, and their peers say what they think. And there is information from that you can use. They talk to their peers, they talk to people who have been in front of them, lawyers, and people like you and me. So it's not perfect, but there is information, and it's better than, I don't even know who these people are. Another thing, if you want to get involved, this doesn't do anything for me, but I just think it's a good citizen policy. If you can volunteer at a polling place, they're very, very long days, which just made everybody sign off. But what we used to have was there were a lot of homemakers at home, and they could work and they could get money. And it's not a huge amount. Well, we don't have that section of society to the extent we used to. And it's very hard for them to get poll workers. They also have to have, every place they have to have equal Republican and Democrat. So when they go to St. Louis City, they can find lots of Democrats to work at the polls, but they can't find very many Republicans. When they go out to St. Charles, it's just the opposite. So if you can do that, you're not going to get rich, but it is a really good public service, but it is a long day. But I just throw it out there because we all complain about lines at the poll and this and that, but now like what we see in the stores, you go to the store, you're pretty much going to check out your own groceries because they can't get places. Clementine's is supposed to be coming to Kirkwood and they kept delaying their opening because they couldn't find people to work there. And it's an ice cream store. Who doesn't want to work in an ice cream store? So, you know, if we can help with that, it's just a good thing for everybody. So the bottom line is, please go vote. I have voted so many times when I knew that the person I was voting for was major league behind. I still go vote. Part of it's because that's the way I was raised. My dad's parents were immigrants. He was first generation, and they came from some pretty tough governments. And so he just came, you know, he was raised that this was great. My grandmother couldn't even vote because women couldn't vote when, you know, but anyway, the thing is, we don't appreciate our right to vote as much as many other countries do. We have a lower turnout than most countries that we would compare ourselves to. And it really is a civic responsibility. I vote even when I know, like I say, my people or my issues are not going to win, but just do it. I mean, if you spend an hour watching TV on a Tuesday, you can go vote and give yourself, you know, a serious talk about this. And I really appreciate your having me. If there's anything I can do, I see there's some chat comments. I'm happy to, this is what the league does.
So we do have a couple of questions. Okay, so the first one is, why is voter turnout so low in local elections?
I think people, well, this is just speculation, but presidential elections can be, I mean, they're starting, you know, 3 and 4 years ahead of time. They have a lot of money to spend. People know, they see the buildup, like, oh, there's going to be a presidential debate. So who are those 12 people on stage? I think there's anticipation, there's publicity. I don't think people plug into who the local people are. And one thing that the league has always done, but what we're doing, if someone calls us and asks us to do a candidate forum, then we do that. This is a public service that we do. And that's helped a lot of people to know who their local candidates are. There are a lot for school board this year, and there are also some for local government. But I don't know, but I'm thinking it just doesn't get the publicity, and people are not plugged in enough to know, I like this person, I don't like that person.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people usually, I mean, I could be wrong. People usually don't go out to vote because they know, they kind of have a feeling that their candidate is not going to win. And
sadly, that may be.
And they're like, well, what is my vote gonna make? How is my vote gonna make that difference? But
well, it happens.
It happens, yeah. And then some people, and that's what people don't understand, that every vote counts, literally.
And if your candidate's going down, you don't want the one you don't like or don't care for to win by a landslide.
Okay, so how important it is for a person to know if he or she is eligible to vote in the US, citizen versus permanent residence, or the US citizen who lost his or her right to vote?
You have to be a citizen to vote. I think that question was in there, but yeah, non-citizens don't vote in our country. There have been times, but you know, not now.
But even permanent residents, they can't vote either?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
If
No,
you're a green card holder, I don't think you can.
yeah,
That's the whole point of citizenship. Like,
right. That's
voting
one of the
here.
things you get with citizenship is the right to vote. Now, that's federal. Like they're talking in, oh, I can't remember what state. Is it New York? They're talking about letting non-citizens vote in local elections. Well, the local government has control, like they could have non-residents or non-citizens vote in a school board election, but no state can say, yeah, you can vote in the federal election because the feds have control over that, and that's not going to happen. That's a good reason to get your citizenship.
Yeah. What is the process of volunteering at the polling places? What are the requirements?
I think you just pretty much have to be a warm body. You could call the county election board, St. Louis County Election Board. I'll just tell you, they're wonderful. We are so blessed. There are others that are wonderful too. And call them and just ask them. And they are so happy to have people, especially with COVID, because a lot of those little old ladies didn't want to come out and work the polls with COVID.
Okay, what is the difference between a municipal and a midterm elections?
A midterm is just like this year will be a midterm because Biden was elected in 2020, even though he didn't take office in 2020, but he was elected in 2020. So this is the middle of his middle between 2020 and 2024. Now that can be state senate, not the senators. Senators in Missouri, the U.S. senators are on a 6-year term, so they're wacky as far as fitting in a box. They're not wacky personally, but everyone else in our House and Senate, in the state Senate, they have either a 2-year term or a 4-year term, and so they're always coming up in the midterms.
So what is the purpose of a midterm election?
A lot of times it is, well, half of our two-year term our state reps, they only have a 2-year term, so they're coming up all the time. And the purpose is, when we have term limits or we have to vote people back in the local government, a lot of councils, like a city council, it'll have staggered, like they might have a 4-year term or they might have a 6-year term, but a third of the council comes up every 2 years. And it's just sometimes like municipal elections usually happen every year. Odd numbers, even numbers. So it's who's on the ballot. Midterms is just to do with the midterm of the presidential, and what you're hearing is, in midterms, which will be November of this year, the House may go red, the Senate may go red. That's because those things get all jumbled up in the midterms. There's a lot of people running for re-election.
So how do we encourage the people to go out and vote?
Well, when they complain, I think people don't feel connected. They don't feel their power. And that's kind of sad to me. I mean, I vote, and a lot of times I'm just totally frustrated because, whatever I voted for didn't work. But I think you need to just believe that it's important to vote. I think if you just give up and say so-and-so is going to win, so it doesn't matter, then in my opinion, maybe you've let the turkeys win.
Yeah.
You have to be stubborn.
And it's that thinking that we need to change.
And I'm probably older than most of you, but it used to be, I was talking to somebody about this who's younger than I am. And I said, it used to be that your household was Republican or Democrat, just like you were Christian or Jewish or Muslim, your family generally. And so you grew up in a Democratic household or something. So it was like you needed to go because it was like you don't not go to church because people will think you're less if you don't do your duties. And we don't have that anymore. And maybe we shouldn't, but people still need to vote.
No, I agree. Here's what is a candidate panel? I know you talked about it, but can you give more details?
Well, the way the league does a candidate, we call it a candidate forum. It's not a debate because the people on the panel do not talk to each other. They answer questions from the moderator. It's if someone asks us to come in, it can be a school board, it can be a council, it can be whatever, we will come and set it up as long as we can get good representation. If we can only get like one candidate, like the Republican person won't come, say they're an incumbent. So if they don't come, there's no other competition. Then we would maybe have several Democrats running. Well, we don't do that because it's too partisan. We don't just want to give one side the floor, but if we can get enough of the people to agree on a time and a place, and then what happens is we have questions that our audience generated. They're not league questions, and we ask the first person and they get a minute, ask the second person, they get a minute, ask the third. It goes all the way down the line. You don't get to say, Mr. Smith, now I heard that your kid was in trouble in school. No, because that question has to go all the way down the line. And so it is very focused on non-personal issues. Now, they may be a big factor in who you decide to pick, but you got to find that out on your own. We're going to talk issues.
Here's another one. How do we request a candidate forum? Who should host it?
Well, we host it. If you call us, call the office. I think I had that. Let me see. Maybe I'll go back to the beginning. Let's see if I can put that first slide up again. Go ahead and ask me whatever else. I got to keep going up. This is not the perfect way to do it, but okay. If you call this number 961-6869 and request a candidate forum, we are scheduling them now for the spring election.
Oh, okay.
And I may see you there.
I know you mentioned in the graph that the age group of 18 to 24, the chart is really low. Why do you think that is?
Well, it has been. I think it's changing. And I think part of that is some of the things like the youth involvement around things like mass shootings in schools where the high school kids, not that the parents aren't involved, but where it's kind of been led by youth. That's starting to change some of these things. And I think the youth is more diverse. It is more diverse. When you look at it, like we might be X percent, say, Black in our total population, but there'll be a smaller number at my age group, a smaller percent, and a larger percent at the younger ones. And immigration's like that too, because people bring younger children, or they come here and they have little kids. So I think it's getting better. I think it's apathy. I'm part of the generation that I said did not get to vote at 21. And one of the reasons they thought that giving people the vote at 18, part of it was the draft, but they thought it would quell some of the unrest, things that, were considered shocking back then. And they were at the time. But unfortunately, when they gave 18-year-olds the vote, we didn't see this huge percentage of 18-year-olds voting. And I'm embarrassed about that, but it's true.
Nancy, you mentioned in your presentation that your grandparents immigrated here and they struggled with the right to vote. Can you talk a little bit about that? You said your grandmother couldn't even vote because women weren't allowed to at that time.
Right. Well, 1920 was the year. Well, let me just back up a minute, because I think as we try to learn history, there are some misstatements sometimes. I hear a lot of people say women couldn't vote before 1920. There were states that allowed women to vote. And in fact, New Jersey was letting women vote very early on, before the Civil War, and then they took it away. And Wyoming came in as a state with women voting. But it's kind of like gay marriage or abortion rights, things like that. The federal can say everybody must do this. But if they don't, then this state can have its rule, that state can have its rule. And so there were women voting, but there wasn't universal women's voting. And my grandparents came here before 1920, and no, they couldn't vote. My grandmother could, actually my grandfather couldn't until I became a citizen. There's just a long history of when the country was founded. It was a bunch of states that had been through the Revolutionary War and realized that they couldn't function separately. George Washington could not pay his troops because there was no way to raise federal money. Federal government couldn't tax. He didn't have a way to pay them. He lied to them. Like, it's coming, keep fighting, it'll be here. Because there was no way to say there are federal taxes to pay the Revolutionary Army. And so when they got together, it was always very suspicious of the federal government, but they needed to share money. So every state didn't have its own money. They needed a way to tax for federal things. They needed something. So they just kind of got together very loosely. But the 10th Amendment says anything that's not given to the federal government belongs with the states. And that was the philosophy. Now that we are more interconnected with transportation and communication and education, we sort of think that all states should have, or women should have a right to choose in all the states. I mean, individuals may or may not, but that's the thing. We recognize gay marriage. We recognize the right of different people to vote. But that was kind of hard to get the federal government involved. It was a big, big deal when Johnson sent federal troops to allow Black students into schools because schools were local. And what is the federal government doing? That was a really hard decision. And like a long, decades before that, at the end of the Civil War, there were people in Massachusetts that were in the federal government that were saying, well, we need to go down and help because all these Jim Crow laws are popping up, and didn't get anywhere because that's states' rights. When I was growing up, if your parents hit you, that was a family problem. Now we have all these, things that say that you're not supposed to. But I'm not saying my parents abused me. I'm just saying people would look the other way because that was a family issue. It wasn't a government issue. Those schools were state problems or things to run. And women's suffrage was part like that. We're very different about that federal state than we were when we started. And I think people lose that sometimes.
This will be our last question. What is the biggest challenge facing voting rights?
Well, I think what we should really focus on are the voting acts, the John Lewis and the other, there are two big voting bills that are just tangled up in basically the Senate at this point. But there are many, there a handful of issues bundled into one. But things like Missouri is really tightening restrictions on voting. The strict photo ID laws coming. It's not, the law isn't coming, but there's a bill every time to say if you don't have a photo ID, you can't vote. There are things where there is a significant group of people who don't think there should be mail-in voting. Like if you want to, you can come to the county board of elections and vote early, like a week or two early. But I mean, this is what they're proposing. But no, this mail your ballot in, we don't want that because that's where all the fraud is coming from. And there's nothing to support that. So there are a lot of people trying to tighten up restrictions to prevent fraud that wasn't happening. And it's very frustrating because when you say, give us some data, there you can't get it. You know, you hear about the one person.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy, so much. This was very informative. Huma, did you want to add anything?
No, just thank you, Nancy, so much for coming to speak to us today. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but hopefully in the future, maybe you could help people in our community register to vote prior to the midterm elections. That would be great.
Yes, that would be great. Call the office, and if you have a location or a time or a date, we will usually come. I mean, COVID goes up and down.
Right.
During some of the more quarantined parts of COVID, we did back to school drives where we put stuff in baggies and hand out a baggie, you know, take this home, read it, mail it in. So we will work with you, and that is what we do. Don't feel timid. That's what we do.
Great. Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
And thank you for
This
all
is
the
fun.
viewers who attended. We appreciate the support, and inshallah, next viewing will be virtual without any difficulties, technical difficulties.
And I would be happy to come back in the future, not next week, in the future on a different topic if you have one that you would like a speaker on.
Oh, definitely.
Definitely. I mean,
I kind of enjoy this.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You take
everybody.
care. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.